Hi, y'all, and welcome to tonight's live stream. It is the most important issue in the entire case. Everything rides on whether the jury believes the confessions of Richard Allen. Does the jury believe the very things that Richard Allen himself says he did? Today, the defense set out to convince the jury that just because Richard Allen said it doesn't mean it's true. That these confessions are fake, that they are caused by what the defense says is barbaric treatment that he was particularly susceptible to because he has a mental disorder. So how did they do, and what do you think about the evidence they presented today? Let's just dive right in. It's such important information that I want us to get into it right away. We've got a lot to cover tonight, so I want to go ahead and hop in. So the witness on the stand was Dr. Polly Westcott. She's a neuropsychologist, and a neuropsychologist is sort of a hybrid between a neurologist and a psychologist, sort of, and specializing in two things. First of all, she said psychology as applied to legal issues, and then neuropsychology, how the brain affects the way someone behaves. So that's her specialty. She spends about 50% of her time doing expert testimony and 50% doing regular treatment of patients in her own office setting. She actually worked for the Indiana Women's Prison for a year. So she talked about the fact that it's very unusual to have as many records and as much information as she had in this particular case. She said she had 20 hours of video footage. So it could be, you could actually see the behaviors that were being discussed. You could actually watch Richard Allen in his cell and correlate that to what was written down about how he was behaving. She said that's very unusual for a pretrial detainee, and there's a good reason for that. Very rarely are they put into prison instead of jail. Normally, someone who has not yet been convicted goes to jail, and only after the conviction are they then transferred to the prison. So she said she actually met Richard Allen, that she was with him for about 5 to 6 hours over a couple of days as she administered some testing to him. She wrote a massive 127-page report, only slightly shorter than the Franks memo, I think, that was done by the defense team in this case. She talked about Richard Allen's mental health background, which is way more than just than someone who came in just with a clean slate and then had a problem in prison. She said he brought these conditions into prison with him, that he had an extensive mental health background with intense fears and anxiety. His fears, for example, were that something bad would happen to his family or about what other people think. Now, that really hits themes with what the jury has already seen, because we heard in those initial interviews when Richard Allen was being accused by law enforcement and was adamantly denying that he had anything to do with the murders of Libby and Abby, that in that early session, he kept saying to his wife when they brought her in, I really care about what other people think. And they talked to the neighbors. How am I ever supposed to get past this? You've already done it, he said to Steve. I think it was Steve Mullen, whichever law enforcement he was talking to at the time. So that resonates with the theme in what the jury has heard. There was also a lot of talk about how worried he was about his wife, Kathy. And then there were a lot of comments about how he had K'd or unalived his family, and which clearly is not true. They're present at the trial. One of them testified today, and then his wife has been sitting at the trial the entire time. So clearly not something that he had actually done, even though he said during these confessions, he also confessed to having done that. That could be his fear about something bad happening to his family. So some of what she said was resonating with what the jury has been hearing in terms of evidence. She said that in adulthood, he had taken medications for anxiety, and then the depression was a reaction to the anxiety. Then he had a clear history of external stressors that would cause him to fall apart, that he would just curl up in a ball crying. That was something that he had actually experienced in the past. So the witness was asked by the defense lawyer, well, what about a family history of mental health? And the prosecution objected to that, saying, well, it's all hearsay because Mr. Allen is telling professionals what somebody else told his family member they had. So it's way too far out for that. There's no medical records related to those family members. It's just Richard Allen saying what he thinks the medical records would say if somebody had them. That I think that they could have gotten past that objection in the way that they got past one in just a few questions down. This is something that is regularly considered in as part of the treatment by a neuropsychologist. That's how they make their evaluations. They want to know, do you have a mental health history yourself? Does your family have a mental health history? Because it plays into their decisions about whether or not you would be somebody who might have this condition now. So, but it got sustained, so it didn't come in. She talked about the fact that one time before he had lived away from his family and he had just crumbled. So this wasn't the only instance in which it had happened. She also talked about his dependent personality disorder, also something the prison psychologist, Dr. Walla, had talked about. And that's where she said, you can't function or make decisions on your own. You are overly dependent on other people to do that. And for him, for anyone, incarceration would be pretty significant, and it exacerbated his fears of abandonment and rejection. And so he just fell apart because he really needed his loved ones in a way that's not the same as what other people would. She came up with 6 conclusions. I want to run through them. And honestly, it was really compact, short testimony. I'd expected it to last maybe all day, but they just got these out and zipped on through. So number 1, he had a long history of mental health issues. She called him a fragile egg. In other words, easily damaged, easily traumatized. And in this particular case, we saw it in the way, she's going to argue, we saw it in the way he confessed and in the things he said and did. She said that she started to say that his father abandoned him and his mother remarried, and there was an objection. And then that was overruled. And because the defense made the argument, well, this is the kind of information that a neuropsychologist regularly relies on. That's the kind of thing they find. So whether the jury was exaggerating, whether Richard Allen was lying or exaggerating or malingering or faking, she said, we can administer tests. And that's one thing she did. She said, we can actually test to see that. We can look to see, do they tend to over-report things or do they tend to under-report things? What we're looking for is consistency. And if we see that, then we can know that the person is not lying. They're not faking. Dr. Walla had argued that she at least considered and probably believed that all of these symptoms he was having, the crazy things he was doing in prison, like drinking toilet water, like rubbing feces on himself, those things, she argued, well, I think he's just faking. I think he's trying to get attention. He's trying to get secondary gain. He's trying to get something. And I don't know what it is, she said, but he's wanting something out of this. So the testing, she said, they could look back retroactively by looking at how he answered now. They could look back retroactively, and that she said in this case, it was pretty easy to do because there were more records than she had ever seen in any case she's ever been a part of. So, and that would include the 24-hour video recording of Richard Allen in his cell, the fact that a camcorder followed him every single time he left, even just to go to rec or any shower, a camera always went with him. And so all of those records will be included in her thinking or her thought process. So number 3, she did not believe he was faking or exaggerating. She said, instead, the testing showed he had significant slowing cognitively. In other words, he just wasn't thinking as fast or as clearly, and he was slower to understand, slower to respond. In fact, it was so dramatic that he was in the 5th to 6th percentile of other people the same age. And this from somebody who had actually been a manager at a Walmart. So somebody who would have been very high functioning at a prior period in life is at the 5th or 6th percentile in terms of his functioning and cognitively at this time when he's tested. There was also frontal lobe and executive functioning was really decreased. She said it was in the 2nd to 4th percentile of other people the same age. So those showed her that he wasn't faking or exaggerating, that these were real effects that were actually happening in his brain based on what was occurring around him and the way he was reacting to them because of his major depressive disorder as well as anxiety. She also talked about his perseveration, and that's like, if you've ever tried to get a 2-year-old to, stop yelling about why they didn't get the piece of candy, they persevere. No, I didn't get the piece of candy. Look over here. No, I didn't get the piece of candy. At least my kids were like that. So perseverating is where you just can't seem to force yourself to the next topic. You just get stuck on that one thing over and over again. And so before his incarceration, she said the kinds of things he would perseverate about were like his job and his family, checking his stocks. And after his incarceration, what he felt, those were things he felt guilty about. Like, I'm not living up to what I should be doing in my job. I'm not living up to what I should be providing and giving to my family. And those were things he would feel anxious about and blame himself for. She said, basically, after incarceration, all of those things got carried into what he felt in terms of now a much bigger issue that he felt guilty before, but now he was feeling guilty and obsessed with his guilt about being incarcerated. That he blamed himself beforehand and he blamed himself afterwards. But what he was focused on now was whether he was guilty. Now, I fully recognize, I want to just go ahead and make a statement. Many, many people will not buy what she said. I fully understand that, but I want you to understand it, because as long as you understand it, then you can make a really reasoned decision to reject it or to accept it. So I'm going through what she says so we fully understand what the argument is. Until you get that, it's really impossible to argue against it if you don't really even understand it. So the fourth thing she argued was that he had had a real, true decline in his mental and physical health in the first 4 months he was incarcerated. He was talking about unaliving himself. He was mumbling. He was in psychosis. He had delusions. He had false beliefs. He would stare and not react to somebody trying to talk to him. That he would drink out of the toilet, eating feces, wiping it on himself, just behaviors that showed a real decline in his cognitive, mental, physical health. And that when she looked at all of the picture together, and by that she meant the videos, the evidence, everything she had, that he had a major depressive disorder with psychosis. And that hit the severe level, and the high level of stress added to it meant he could go into psychosis. And that's what he did. That's what she said did occur. So she said he had major depressive disorder now with psychosis. That is the linchpin for where the defense is going to argue he got off onto these, what they believe are false confessions. So the sixth thing is the stress of the environment he was in caused these issues. That's important to the defense, because they are arguing that the state put him in very barbaric conditions that were not appropriate for someone who is presumed innocent, and that were far beyond what normally should have happened. The defense would have liked to have put in a report that said that after that, people with mental health conditions should not be held in solitary confinement more than 30 days, and that had various rules around that. They were not able to get it in. The judge kept it out. Nonetheless, they did get in that this was extraordinarily long, the longest that any of the people who testified had ever seen for someone to be in solitary confinement. And by the way, that reminds me, tomorrow night we have a special guest coming. Jumpsuit Pablo will be coming tomorrow night and talking to us. I've got a list of questions for him. How unusual is this prison sentence, this prison condition that he was in? What about the cameras that followed him around? That's just bizarre to me. What about all of the things that he says were problems for him. Are they normal? Are they abnormal? What about 13 months of solitary? What does he think about that? Jumpsuit Pablo, for those of you who haven't followed him, was incarcerated for 10 years. So he now has a channel and he talks about some of these issues. So we're going to ask him those questions tomorrow night. I'll also be, of course, reporting on the trial, but he'll come on for a little bit and we can ask him all our questions about this incarceration, how bad it was, how unique it was, how difficult he think it would be, how difficult he thinks it would be for somebody like Richard Allen to survive this. So we'll be asking all those questions. So don't miss tomorrow night. It's going to be a great show, including, of course, we'll be summarizing everything that happened during the day. So at this point, and I want to share my screen with you because I want to show you what she talked about. She talked about the fact, well, let me add a couple more things, that he had never been incarcerated before. Plus, he was separated from his wife, on whom he was extra dependent because of that personality disorder. And so she said that literally can change the brain chemistry. So let me show you another document. I'm going to see if I can, let's see. All right. I am going to share my screen with you. Hopefully we will see, right? But I think we've got it now. Okay. Yay. Okay. All right. So one of the things she talked about being able to do and being part of her job is handwriting analysis. Now, the prosecution asked her a series of questions. Well, handwriting analysis. What do you know about handwriting analysis? You're not a handwriting expert. And she explained that she is, in terms of how handwriting reflects your mental health. So she said she compared, for example, this particular letter that I'm showing you right here. It was actually admitted into evidence, but redacted. We don't know exactly what got redacted from it. This was written early on, November 9th of 2022, just a matter of a couple of weeks, maybe, after he had been incarcerated, arrested and charged with the crimes and incarcerated. And in this letter, and she said the kinds of things you look at are, look at the writing. Is the grammar correct? Is the spelling correct? Is it all on the lines or does it go all over the place? And so you can see he says, in the cause listed above, I, Richard M. Allen, hereby throw myself at the mercy of the court. I am begging to be provided. There's no D with, and I mentioned that only not to call him out, but because what we're supposed to look for is stuff like that, with legal assistance in a public defender or whatever help is available. So primarily everything is written on the lines. You can see that mostly the grammar and spelling is all correct, especially given that it has to all be handwritten, can't be done by computer. That's not available. And he talks about, in my initial hearing on October 29, 2022, I asked to find representation for myself. However, at the time, I had no clue how expensive it would be just to talk to someone. I also did not realize what my wife and I's immediate financial situation was going to be. We have both been forced, I'm going to have to go over here, make it a little bit bigger. We've both been forced to immediately abandon employment, myself due to incarceration and my wife for her personal safety. She has had to abandon our house for her own safety. What little reserve there is will fail to even maintain the original residence. Again, I throw myself at the mercy of the court. Please provide me whatever assistance you may. Thank you for your time in this most urgent matter. So you can see from that pretty much it's written coherently. You follow along. It expresses a particular thought. Everything about that seems pretty normal as to what you would expect. Now, we don't have a lot to show us what his writing was like later. The only thing I could find, and I'll share a different screen with you, is and remember that the actual exhibits are not available, but I found this on Fox 59. Now, this is actually a writing when Richard Allen wanted to confess to the warden. Notice how Fox 59 has put recreation up there. And I think what they mean is you're not allowed to literally photograph or anything like that, the exhibits. In fact, the public isn't even allowed to see the exhibits. the public is in the back, way back, and only the media is allowed to go up at the end of the day to look at the exhibit. So Fox 59 would have seen this exhibit. I assume they're talking about the one from this trial. And so I guess they just recreated it. I can't speak to whether it's exact, but I just want you to notice some of the things they talked about. Now, the actual letters are correct and written neatly, very far more legible than my handwriting. Let's just go ahead and admit that. But notice how Richard Allen kind of comes up off the name, and then I'm ready to officially confess, and then written below, killing Abby and Libby, just kind of written off to the side right below that. There's no punctuation. And then it says, I hope I get the opportunity to tell the families I'm sorry. And you can see it's not all written on the line. It's the punctuation isn't there. I don't even see any punctuation in that, come to think of it. And and you can see where the language is off, officially confess. And it's just it's not all written in the same way the other letter was. And we can tell the reason I wanted to show you that, and thank Fox 59 for that recreation, is that comparison shows that he had changed cognitively, mentally. Something had changed. He was no longer writing in the same coherent, organized fashion that he had done before. And that she didn't show those two examples, but she talked about it. And I thought those two examples would be useful for you to understand and evaluate what she was arguing. So, all right. So moving to the conclusion of what she said, she said she compared, she talked about comparing those two, but they didn't put them up on the screen or anything like that. So I wanted to show you those two. She said, if you look at that and you look at all of the testing and you look at the way he's moving away from linear thinking, she thought that was all relevant and significant. She talked about an objective personality test she had done, and the state said, look, you didn't produce that to us, you can't use it. The judge sustained that, even though the defense argued, well, we provided the report to them. They got it in anyway. They had to go around to get it in, but that happened. So they said there's no indication that he was not telling the truth or being straightforward, that he had a personality disorder. He was extremely dependent on others to feel good about himself. He avoids conflict, and he has a strong fear of rejection or abandonment. So, and let me be clear, when she says no indication he was not telling the truth or being straightforward, she's talking about when he was presenting with all of these symptoms that she was testing specifically to see, was he faking it? Is he drinking toilet water, like the guard said, like the psychologist from the prison said, just to get attention? And if so, why? Why would he do that and then confess? What attention is he going to get while he's confessing that's good enough to make up for the fact that he just confessed? But that's my spin on it. I never have understood that. But in this particular case, she's saying that there's no indication he was making up these symptoms, that he was really actually having a complete mental health breakdown right there in his cell in isolation in the prison. So she's arguing this isn't fate. That she found consistency with his psychosis. In other words, when he was psychotic, he was for real psychotic, and she could track it across every place she looked, which I would assume would include the video she watched, what the guards wrote down as to what was happening every 15 minutes, the kinds of things the psychologist wrote down. If you put all of those together, then she's saying it's consistent. You can see he's in psychosis here, and she defined it. She said, December to March 2023, you can see where he's losing his abilities. He has less emotional reactivity. His thinking is slowing. He's mumbling. He's keeping to himself. You can see it coming. But she said it doesn't really become full blown until April of 2023, and it lasts through June or July of 2023. And after that, he's no longer in full psychosis. Now, full psychosis is important because he continued to confess a few times after that. And so I assume that she's wanting to cover that and protect it as well. So she said he just isn't somebody with a lot of emotional reserve. He's not very resilient. He's more likely to decompensate. She talked about the conditions he was in with the lights on all the time. He wasn't sleeping. He had substantial weight loss, and that delirium has been known to result from solitary confinement. Now, that was objected to because the court did point out, and the prosecution, that there was earlier testimony that he was diagnosed as, or determined not to be in delirium. And she's saying, well, that can result from solitary confinement. So is it relevant if he didn't have it? So in the cross-examination was a little difficult for the state, I felt like, because I think this witness was so good. She was really, really a great witness. And so it was difficult to sort of get her pinned down. Here, I'll go through what they argued. And mostly it just tended to be small facts that would suggest, well, maybe it wasn't as bad as otherwise thought. So, for example, that Walla, the psychologist in the prison, saw him daily. The neuropsych who was testifying was saying, well, that isn't what I understood. I understood that, and I would be with the neuropsych on this. I thought they were saying that somebody saw him every day, but not necessarily Dr. Walla. So, and there were questions about the window. There were complaints that Richard Allen was in a windowless room, basically, because it was so scratched he couldn't see out. And if he could, all he would see is a chain link fence. He wasn't actually going to be able to see the outside. And so apparently one of the questions was, well, okay, what makes you think the window was so scratched he couldn't see out? It's just that Richard Allen told you? And she said, well, no, actually it was in the medical records. So also talked about how the lights, in fact, could be dimmed. So although the lights were on, Richard Allen apparently had some power to dim them. Having the lights on all the time, of course, would be pretty disorienting because you wouldn't necessarily know is it daytime? Is it night? Like, what is it? That could lead to his trouble sleeping and all of the problems he had that then moved him into psychosis. So she said he could leave for rec. And let me preface this. The prosecution said, well, he wasn't stuck in his cell 100% of the time. Several times a week, he could go out to rec several times, and at least once a week to a shower, that he came out of the cell to have his vitals taken by the nurse. And at this point, the witness said, well, sometimes he refused to go out for vitals. He was afraid to be removed from his cell. That was picked up on specifically by the jurors in some of their questions. So I'll get to those. They had lots of questions. But she concluded, there's just, let me make sure I've covered everything for you. I've got my highlights per usual. She said that his confessions were inconsistent with known facts. And specifically, she said the fact that, but one of the things she included was he killed the girls is inconsistent with he did not. But she argued, the confessions don't make sense. The defense went on to prove a couple of confessions, not related to the killing of Libby and Abby, but a couple of confessions that they were, in fact, false. So we'll get to that in just a minute. She concluded there's just no evidence for malingering, no evidence that he's faking it. And if Walla, so then there was an interesting set of questions from the prosecution saying, okay, well, maybe he confessed to Dr. Walla because he had this dependent personality disorder and he had transferred all his dependence on his wife to Dr. Walla because now he was in prison and she was basically the only person speaking to him. So he depended on her, and that's why he would confess to her. That was the implication. But the doctor said, well, yeah, I don't see any evidence of that. Please, he didn't. If he said, please don't leave me to the doctor, it doesn't mean he transferred his dependency to her. So she disagreed with that, but it was an interesting argument. And I wondered if Dr. Walla or somebody would come back on rebuttal to talk a little bit more about that. So now came an important question from the prosecution. Well, is everything that somebody says when they're in psychosis entirely due to the psychosis, or could some of it actually be true? And the answer is, well, yeah, some of it could really be true, even though it is said while you're psychotic, you could still be telling the truth. That exact question has really bothered the jury. They asked Dr. Walla that. So the prosecution went in and asked the question. And the prosecution also pointed out that when she summarized the confession, she left out a couple of really strong ones. Now, her argument for that was that they were in Dr. Walla's writing without quotes around them. I didn't find that great. I mean, I suspect she left them out because they weren't really helpful. That's what I would assume. But she argued that it was because they weren't quotes around it, so they weren't directly attributable to Richard Allen, so she just didn't mention them. I would have thought she would still mention them and say, but it was in her writing and it didn't have any quotes around it, so this may be her summary and it may or may not be correct. Now, I would have thought that would have been how she handled it. All right, and like I said, let's see how many, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 jury questions. So it's a lot. I won't go through all of them, but it was really a large number. So for example, here's one. You stated, they said to the doctor, that you were afraid, and this is not a medical doctor, by the way. Dr. Westcott is, I would assume, some kind of PhD in the field of neuropsychology. So you stated he was afraid to leave his cell because of threats throughout the prison. If he had the common sense, and I'm rephrasing, I didn't get every word. If he had the common sense to be afraid for his safety, would he also have the common sense to only confess to things that were true? So I'm paraphrasing, but that was the basic idea. So if he's savvy enough that he knows it's really a bad idea to go out in the prison because people may be after him, is he savvy enough to know, hey, confessing could be bad for me unless it's true? And she said, well, the leaving his cell and that fear was in March as he was decomposing. It wasn't later. It wasn't later in the time when he was actually having trouble with confessing. That is not entirely true, as we will look at our, I'm going to be doing our confession timeline again tonight. And you can see from the confession timeline that actually he did confess at least once in March. So anyway, I just mentioned that. That's the kind of thing that our timeline really helps with, is putting everything into perspective. She argued that okay, let me ask the question first. The juror question was, if someone has depression and anxiety as a child, would that cause them to commit crimes as an adult? And one of the things is, well, what if he had a psychotic break on February 13th, 2017, had a psychotic break just like we see in prison, and suddenly went out and killed Libby and Abby? Is that a thing? So essentially that's the question. She said, well, it would depend on the person and the circumstances, but the way he tested Richard Allen was that his personality showed he's very passive, not someone aggressive and likely to act out. Let's see. They wanted to know whether he had a full diagnosis as major depressive disorder with psychosis versus full psychosis. And I think there's somebody there with some medical training, because they often ask kind of medical oriented questions. So I think that was one of them that was being asked. And she said, well, he wasn't just psychotic and that's his full diagnosis. His diagnosis is major depressive disorder with psychosis. The police interview, one juror asked her, did you watch the police interview from, and this was October 22nd. That was before he was arrested. In fact, the day he was arrested. And in that, he was absolutely adamant that he was not guilty and that he had not killed Libby and Abby, and he wasn't going to confess to it, wasn't going to do it. So at this point, the juror said, did you watch that? I thought that was really interesting. I was trying to figure out what was the reasoning behind it? Because they didn't say, did you watch it and what did you think? They just said, did you watch it? And she said, no, she had not watched that interview. I thought it was extremely helpful for the defense. That interview really was Richard Allen totally relaxed and saying, I absolutely did not do that. There didn't seem to be the kind of things you might expect if somebody is lying about that. It looked real to me. And so I think that I thought it was really interesting that a juror asked about that particular interview. As far as the question about, you stated he was afraid to leave his cell. If he has the common sense to be afraid for his safety, shouldn't he have the common sense to know not to confess? I thought that kind of leaned toward the prosecution. So whoever asked that would be sort of pro-prosecution. I have said up until now that I think the fact that the jury has been sequestered together means it's more likely that they will reach a conclusion, not be a hung jury. But I don't know. These questions do seem to go both ways, and I wonder if the jury is somewhat divided right now. Technically, they should not be discussing their final verdict until they've heard all the evidence. However, they have been allowed to discuss the case anytime all of them are present, and in one place, they can talk about whatever they've heard so far. So have they been talking about it? And do they have two different factions? Do some people tend to believe the confessions and some people say, I don't think that's true? He seemed like he really, in that interview, like he wasn't guilty. So I was very intrigued by the fact that they seem to go in, to me, opposite directions. All right, so we are going to move into the videos that they showed in the afternoon. And these were, we again watched the jury get very wrapped up in what they were seeing. This time, they were seeing actual video of Richard Allen in his cell during the most significant decomposition. We're going to look at where that fits into the confessions too. So let me say thank you to a few people. Dolly has been a member for 2 months. Fantastic. And 9AB and Minanya are both new members. Welcome. Shelly F., thank you so much. Sharon, I appreciate that as well. Redsky. Oh, I'm so glad you're here from Lawyer You Know. Yeah, I really enjoyed that. Thank you for being here. Met Spunky. Well, thank you. I appreciate that and love to everybody out there. We have tonight with us, by the way, a brand new mod. Give her, please, a Lawyer Lee welcome. We very much value people being nice to one another here on the channel. And so please give her your appreciation. Denise Pelton is going to join us as a mod. We are so glad to have her joining Mama Pinks and Marlon, who have been mods and done yeoman's duty for a long, long time. So Denise, welcome. We are so glad to have you. So grateful to have you. And she's training. So you know that the first time that you do anything, it's always hard and not necessarily all that successful. If anything's hard for her, know she is trying and that we are so appreciative of her and so glad to have her here. All right. So, thank you, Miss Monkey. I appreciate that. Very generous super chat too. So, all right, well, let's get into the next witness, who was Max Baker. And we're going to mix this in with that timeline I've been doing on Richard Allen's confessions, his total mental breakdown. We're going to be looking at that in just a minute. Max Baker is a legal intern for the defense lawyer, Brad Rosie. And he's very young. I'm guessing early 20s, probably maybe he's in college or just out. I mean, he's working full time. So maybe just out of college. And obviously, I mean, I wouldn't be at all surprised if he wants to go to law school and become a lawyer. So this is perfect experience for him. And what he did was compile the videos. There were 2 different sets. He wanted to put in 3 different sets, but that didn't happen. The one is the camcorder that literally followed Richard Allen around the prison whenever he was taken out of his cell. The other was the camera that sat in the ceiling in his room and showed the entire room so that he would be watched 24/7. And then the third thing that they wanted to do, he had actually taken a 4-hour chunk of time on the 15th of every month from the time that Richard Allen got into the prison until the time he was pulled out of solitary confinement, and put that together. He said he sped it up and cut down so that if, somebody's sleeping, nothing's happening, all that's eliminated. But what he was trying to do was show this is how he was when he first got there, and this is how he was when he went into heavy psychosis, and this is how he was as he came out, so that the jury could have something to compare it to. I thought that was a great idea. I thought that was such a helpful thing for the jury to see. But in this particular case, the judge ruled that out. So what they did get in was the 15 videos of the camcorder going around. I didn't time it, maybe a couple of hours. They divided it into 2 pieces. Then today's was just about 20 minutes from 2 different days on which Richard Allen, just of the actual overhead of his room. And it was just 2 days worth. That's all it was. It wasn't, and total amount of elapsed time was about 20 minutes, I think. So they had just condensed it and cut and cut and cut. And throughout it, they'd say, can I move to, 3:42:1? And they would, yep, you can. And so he just zipped on through it and just showed the jury the highlights for this 2-day period, just some hours in there. So the time frames were April 12th of 2023 and May 25th of 2023. These are right in the time frame when he's having the most trouble. He is decomposing. He is having mental health trouble, and he's confessing. We're going to look at that in just a second. So the state objects. The state didn't want any of this to come in, but the judge overruled it, saying, well, we'll have a sidebar if we need to, because if they start to go too long, it gets cumulative. But it was so fast. No, there was no time for the sidebar objection. It was over and done. So the things that I noticed, and what you're doing is sort of surreal. You're watching people watch a silent movie. So all you have is their expressions as they watch. That's all you have. And of course, they're in a very public setting, so they're not going to do really big reactions. They're not talking to one another. It's the middle of court. So you get just subtle things. I call him juror number 1, the way I number. Who knows how the judge will number. But he sits at the very end nearest us. Anywhere you sit in the courtroom, you're only going to be able to see really well, maybe 5 jurors, depending on where you sit, maybe a few more, a few less, and then you'll get some view of others. So everybody's going to have a little bit different takeaway. But this juror is the easiest for everybody to see, and he's pretty expressive. So, he does this. And you can't see the front of his face. So, it's sort of like, and you can just see, or like this. And it almost looks like he's like, but you can't see the front of his face. So I don't know, but he seemed very upset through this. Much of the time he didn't watch. He would have his head all the way down in his hands, like kind of covering up. I don't know what they were seeing, but he seemed to be very upset about it. And he was, I thought, the most expressive. I did not see anyone cry. We saw a little bit of that from before. I didn't see any of that. But we saw a number. I saw number 1 and number 14 and several more. Oh, I did take a picture of this. Pinky suggested I do this, but I'll show you. All right. So here is my beautiful courtroom sketch. Woo. All right. So you can see the jury over there and how I've numbered them. You can see the lawyers sitting down here. I can't really do it. Yep. Sitting down there. I wanted you to see how this is the TV, the enormous TV that is faced away. You can see even the lawyers can't see it. See how it's faced toward the judge, Max, who is the witness, who's right there, and then the jury. But those are the only people who can really see it. Now, over here, Luttrell, one of the prosecution lawyers, and Auger stood over here and watched part of it. They didn't stay very long, but they watched part of it. And the McClelland, who is the prosecutor, another of the prosecutors, got up and stood right by the screen and looked at it right up there. Even Brad Rosie can't actually see the screen, but he has a computer sitting in front of him. So he's controlling what they're all seeing, even though he's looking at his computer. So that was kind of the layout and how it worked. But that was how no one in the courtroom was able to see. Not even at this time, the golden ticket holders, the media who had the special passes for the front row, even they can't see it anymore, or couldn't see that particular thing. So I did see number 1 even was like rubbing his head. He just was, he did not look for a good part of the time. It really seemed to upset him. On cross-examination, we learned a few small things about it, that Mr. Allen was in a cell by himself. That wasn't really surprising. That you believed, and the question from McClellan to Max Baker, the young guy who's the legal intern for Brad Rosie's office, was, well, you believe it would be safer for him to be by himself than to be in the general population. And Brad Rosie is like, objection, how is he supposed to know that? I mean, how is he an expert who can answer that? The judge did sustain that and didn't let him answer that. And there were a lot of questions from McClellan about why these videos. Why did you pick these in particular? And the answer was, he said, because I thought they were most important. So the prosecution then wanted to know, okay, why did you pick the incident of him being tased? There were 2 in prison that we know about. And so obviously they showed that to the jury. And that must have been, I don't know whether that was in the walk-arounds or if that was today, but at some point they showed that. What we were told is that he wouldn't take his hands out of the slot in the door that you reach out to get food, or they put food through it to him. So he put his hands through there and wouldn't take them out. So they tased him. At the time, Brad Rosie said it was illogical, not something they needed to do because of the fact that he was in his cell. The door was closed. He wasn't coming out at anybody. So what do you care if his hands are out? But we don't know a lot about that situation, just that comment that Brad Rosie made. So McClellan wanted to say, well, you picked what you wanted the jury to see here. And he was talking at this point about the 15 videos that were the walk-arounds. He said, you wanted to curry favor. You wanted the worst conditions. And objection, but it was overruled. And then the intern, Matt Baker, said, well, if you want to say it that way. And he said, I wanted to, and he said, well, these are the worst conditions, and you picked out the worst. And at that point, Max Baker said, well, I wanted to show more. You could have not objected. Because remember, he had that video where all it would have shown is pretty much nothing happening in order to prove the point that he had decomposed, that he was different from when he first came in. So he said, McClellan said, well, you showed the jury those videos to imply that Richard Allen is a victim. And he said, no, it's an accurate representation of what it looked like. And McClellan said, well, you picked the worst videos. He said, no, I picked the most important. And then the question was, Mr. Allen is not the victim in this case. And the answer was no. Although I will say this, I think a better answer would be, it depends. Or I guess he can't say that. He works for the defense, but I'll say that. Without question, Abby and Libby are the 2 most important victims in the case. But if Richard Allen is innocent and he has been incarcerated and held in solitary confinement for 13 months to the point at which he may never recover mentally and has been held for years, he's also a victim. If he's innocent, he's also a victim. So I think in any event, that's how I felt about it. I understand the prosecution point, which is we cannot overlook Abby and Libby. That's the reason we're here. That's the entire reason for being here. At the same time, we also can't overlook if an innocent person gets incarcerated. That's why we want to know whether or not he's innocent, whether or not he's telling the truth. We want the answer on that. So he said, well, you could have shown more. And he said, you could have not objected. I wanted to show more. It was really a pretty funny moment. If you knew the background of how they had wanted to get more in and couldn't. He said, you didn't pick other incel videos. You picked just these. He said, yes. And as far as I can tell, you didn't either. That was a little smart alecky. And there was kind of a little silence in the courtroom to see what would happen, but nothing did. Juror question was, since you work for the defense, can you confirm if the defense attorney told you to choose the worst? So this is somebody who's wanting to know if this is manipulative, whether the very worst ones are picked. And at this point, the follow-up question, it was like, no, they didn't tell me to do that. But the follow-up question by Rosie was, well, did you compile ones of nothing? And he said, yeah, I was ready to present those to the jury, but the jury still doesn't really understand about what they had planned that the judge ruled out, where they were going to show stuff of him just in his cell, totally normal with nothing much going on. And then we had a lunch break wherein I almost didn't get back into the courtroom. So the way it works is everybody has to go downstairs. Well, they took a long time breaking, holding sidebars. I even left before they finished while they were still at sidebar. I went ahead to get in line, but there were a bunch of people who had not been there during the day, and they had come in for they had come in just for the afternoon session. So, and a lot of people were saving a spot for somebody else. Bottom line was I was like number 27. It's in the reconvened line. So, Truth Seeker gave me her spot. She got in, she sat down and she got up and she said, I'm giving my spot to Lawyer Lee. I don't even know what to say except thank you, because I would have missed it entirely. And I am so appreciative that she did that. And she did that. And so many people have come and stood in line because they want the truth and they want to hear what happened in the courtroom without spin, to the best I can give it to you, the actual facts of how it came out, what happened, my evaluation of it. So I can't even say thank you enough to her. We are expanding our line sitting, and we could sure use some help. There is a sign-up sheet in the link to there's a link to the sign-up sheet in the description. We're expanding this because that's what's happening with the court, is it's expanding. If you can help, we'd be very, very appreciative. I would be appreciative. And I thank you to Truth Seeker for giving up her spot. That was such a selfless and kind thing to do. I really appreciated it. So after lunch, we got into, and I learned a new term. I was like, what? They wanted to use a police report and they called it totem pole hearsay. I'm like, totem pole hearsay? What is that? There was a lawyer sitting next to me. I'm like, where have I been for the last 30 years? I'm like, totem pole hearsay. Do you know what that is? He's like, I've never heard of it. And I thought, well, okay, thank goodness. All it means is hearsay within hearsay. I'm like, okay, all right. Once I looked it up, I was like, well, all right, that's reasonable. So, and what they were arguing is you can't use a police report. If a police report says, Jane told me X, and then the policeman isn't there and Jane isn't there, so you've got hearsay, and they're talking about it might be more than one level. Like, what if Jane comes up to the police officer and says, well, I was standing here when Edna ran by and said, the sky is falling. The Chicken Little ran by and said the sky is falling. And he writes down, that Jane says, Chicken Little says, it can become multiple layers of hearsay. And that's what they were talking about. Anyway, new term. I thought that was fun. And totem pole really made a lot of sense. I thought that image is really good because you have, one animal or figure and then another and another. And I thought that's really good. The very first witness after lunch was Jamie Jones, sister of Richard Allen. They had the same mother, different fathers. And I did say I was going to do that. I'll finish this witness and then I'll go back to my timeline. Okay. The sister of Richard Allen, same mom, different dads. He is 5 years older than she is. And they always lived together in her childhood home. He left fairly early for basic training. He was about 18, she figured. So she would have been roughly 13. And the lawyer for the defense, it was OJ, just said, did Rick ever molest you? And she said, no. Did Rick ever touch you in a sexual way? She said, no. Would you lie for him? No. Those are the only three questions that were asked of any importance. Why are they asking this? Why this weird thing? Is because in the confessions, one of the things he confessed to was molesting his sister. And they're saying that's totally false. That's just, it never happened. And if he would confess to one false thing, how many false things would he confess to? And they want to argue that it would be multiple things. It would be the fact that he supposedly committed these crimes against Libby and Abby. That's also false. So that's what the defense is trying to argue. Now, the cross started to ask, there were younger children. Do you know who Chris is? And that was objected to as not being in the scope of what had been asked on direct. So it never went anywhere. And we learned nothing more about Chris because Richard Allen also confessed to SA against Chris. So that, and I'll do one more and then we'll do our timeline. Yep. because then we get back to scene witnesses. Okay, so Brittany Zapata, Richard Allen is her father. Her mother is Kathy Allen, who has sat in the courtroom day after day, except during the confessions. Sorry, not during the videos that were played of Richard Allen in his cell. I personally thought she should have been there because I could see the jury looking for her. And I mean, they looked and some of them kind of talked like, where is she? Why is she not here? And it wasn't like she could have seen these videos. She was sitting out in the audience. So I don't know. I thought that given that they were looking for her, maybe she should have been there. I understand the thinking. The thinking was why, this would be upsetting. Maybe she doesn't want to see her husband like that. Just get her out of the room. Just as often when crime scene photos are shown, a family will be removed just because it's asking more than they can handle, the victims' crime families. Speaking of which, I do want to mention something. I don't want to go off too much on a segue. Then I won't find my way back. But, somebody left me, handed me a note after court, and they wouldn't tell me who had given it to me. I mentioned this on our members only event. And it was, why is Richard Allen's nudity and protected with privacy, but Libby's and Abby's, well, Libby's, because Abby was fully dressed, but Abby, to some extent, during the autopsy, wasn't protected? I thought that is such an important question. That is really, really important. I've been thinking a lot about that because one of the things that we know from something that Libby's mom had said is that she was, anxious about her weight. She felt uncomfortable with her weight. And here she was just displayed. And there were like little black bars, a little rectangle that would go over a spot, but for modesty. And so that's good. That's better than nothing. But nonetheless, that is unfair. That is really, really unfair. I think that there are policy reasons that they had to show the crime scene photos for evidence, for proof. And I think they were right to show them in a limited fashion to the audience. They did not show, no one was allowed to get copies. No one was allowed to have a camera. They will never, at least they should never be distributed. And so there are those protections. It has so much to do, though, with the evidence in the case. But then you look at Richard Allen's, and to me, same is true. And part of the reason that his treatment in incarceration is so important is because of what it says about the way prisoners are treated. That's a societal issue. That's not something that's just Richard Allen, that's just this one case, or that's only factual within this case. It's something that's important society-wide. Okay, how are we treating prisoners? Are we okay with that? Do we think the way we're doing things is correct? Do we approve of ourselves, basically? And so I think probably the mistake was that they protected that for Richard Allen. But I thought, I can see where the family would have real anger over that. That does seem unfair. That does seem really wrong. Now, Richard Allen has a presumption of innocence. And I get that, but I still believe that for public policy reasons, because of the fact that this is something that we're commenting on as a society, not just in this one case, that the pictures should have been shown. I think there should have been full disclosure of what we saw there and of what was seen there. We didn't get any of that. So whatever beneficial effects there could have been from showing Richard Allen was mistreated and we don't ever want that to happen again, look at what happened here, none of that effect happened because of the fact that the audience didn't get to see it. So there would be 12 jurors who got to see it, and the judge and the witness. That's it, pretty much. I mean, the defense lawyers, and if they wanted to, the prosecution lawyers. But there's no ability of us on the outside to say, hey, we don't approve of that. Regardless of whether he's guilty or innocent, that's not the way we treat prisoners. We don't even have that option. Maybe we would have thought it was fine. From the jurors' reactions, I'm guessing we would not, from the fact the defense wanted to put it in, but it will affect no change and make no difference at all because of the fact that it wasn't disclosed to the public. All right, back to my, fortunately, I haven't forgotten exactly where I was, hopefully not entirely where I was. All right. But anyway, I really have thought a lot about what they said about the girls. And it does just absolutely break my heart for Libby and for her family, particularly, because that's just so wrong. I mean, I really understand that. The sacrifice they're making in order for the public to know the evidence is great. So, did your father ever molest you? Sorry, this was Brittany Zapanta. Those are the three questions. They started to ask the same three questions were asked of Brittany. She lived with her father and mother throughout her childhood. Did your father ever molest you? No. Do you love him? Yes. And would you lie for him? No. Did you go to this trail often? Was a question that the prosecution wanted to ask, and the objection was sustained. Did you go to the Monon High Bridge? Objection was sustained because it was outside the scope of the direct. And they also put in some photographs of Richard Allen during the time frame that showed how he looked in 2017. Obviously, the prosecution wants the jury to believe that he looked a lot like Bridge Guy. Right now, he looks nothing like Bridge Guy. He's very small. He's clean shaven. He's almost has no hair. I mean, he's very close cropped, very, very close cropped on the top. He just doesn't look anything like Bridge Guy. And so they wanted to put in these pictures to show, well, back when he did look more like Bridge Guy. And the defense almost got them out, but then the witness in doing examination, she seems to be saying that's what he looked like in 2017. It's just they were trying to keep the pictures out, but ended up getting them in because she said, yeah, that's what he looked like. We didn't get to see them, but they're probably some of the ones that are floating around on the internet that have been out for a while. So, now interesting with the bridge, there was a juror question. So, okay, the prosecution wasn't allowed to ask, did you go to the Monon High Bridge? Did you go out there often? But instead, a juror said, well, did you visit the High Bridge in your teens? Which would be exactly went out with her father. And did you go with your father? And the answer was yes. She went in her teens. She went with her father. So I felt like if the question was inappropriate for the prosecution to ask, it was also inappropriate for the juror to ask, but I don't know how they make those decisions. I'm so unused to that whole procedure where the jury gets to ask questions like this. So in any event, the answer was yes, she went to the High Bridge. She said she was terrified of it and she only went across it one or two times. She did not go every time. That wasn't her thing. So next witness, and let me say thank you to a few people. Thank you, Gretchenaro. I appreciate that. Oh, this is really nice. Kylie is saying, for so many Aussies to be tuned in on Melbourne Cup Day, that is a high, high honor. Thank you very much. Well, I really appreciate it. Thank you. And Chaos MXR is a new member. And Defiantly Joyful 68 is thinking of Richard Allen and Orwell 1984. Wow. Wow. Yeah, that's a wild book. I loved that book, though. It really makes you think. All right, let me do a couple more. Death by Corporate, thank you for gifting 5 Lawyerly memberships. And Spunky, thank you for gifting 10. I really appreciate that. Y'all be sure to turn on your ability to receive gifted memberships. Mama Pinks or Marlon or Denise, we'll put that in the chat for you to understand how to do that. So next witness was Shelby Hicks, and she and her boyfriend, Daniel Pierce, were at the bridge that day. I still haven't done my timeline. All right, I'm still going to get to the timeline. Do not fear. We will get to that. And so they arrive and remind me if I forget, but they arrive at the trails about 2:30, but it could be earlier and it could be later, which makes this testimony particularly frustrating because you can't really pull out the facts that you want to pull out. So she parked on a connector? She didn't have the right word, but it was right across from a farm. It was basically the Mears connector. Just about everybody parked there until apparently recently they closed it. And Richard Allen had said in his interview, I park there sometimes, but sometimes they close it off. So still true. How many people did you see? Well, she saw 2 from school, Cheyenne and Shelby. Cheyenne's testified, an older gentleman who had a camera. That is almost surely David McCain. He is an older man, and he testified that he had a camera and might have been wearing it around his neck at the time. So she also saw two girls. Now, we probably would believe that that would be Libby and Abby. That would make sense. But if that's the case, and it's possible because she turned right and walked down toward the Freedom Bridge before she then went left toward the Monon High Bridge. That would put her there not at 2:30 though, because we know Libby took that video at 2:13. So that would mean they would all have to have been entering about the same time, maybe 2 o'clock, something like that. She turns right, goes down toward Freedom Bridge. The girls, Libby and Abby, go straight over toward the Monon High Bridge and arrive there in time to take the 2:13 video. That's just my thinking of about when it would have to be. So she said she went out to the first platform on the bridge, which is where Richard Allen had said he went. She saw her friends, Shelby and Cheyenne, they're friends from high school, and she was walking toward, when she was walking toward the bridge. Wait, did I get that right? She was walking toward? No, they were walking toward the bridge. She was already out there on the first platform that came off the bridge. So she said, and the two kids, she didn't remember where they were walking to, but that's my guess, is that she saw Abby and Libby as they were headed toward the bridge, and she turned the other direction. So they were on the bridge, she and her boyfriend, 30 minutes or less, and they never heard anything. It had to have been right about the time of the kidnapping. And meanwhile, her friends passed her and walked to the end of the bridge where the kidnapping has just happened, the abduction, and they don't see anything. It's just bizarre. I mean, it's really bizarre. And the police, she was asked, well, did the police take your phone to download it? And she said, no. Would you have given it to them? Yes. So some important information about maybe her movements or when she was someplace, all of that might be lost, and it might have made a difference. So a juror questioned, was the man with the camera old? She'd already said he was. And she said, yes. So the people on the jury are wondering, is this David McCain? The answer is yes, it's David McCain. And no one apparently suspects David McCain. So that no one has suggested that. Steve Mullen was next. He has testified now, I don't even know how many times, 4 or 5. And he talked about the 2016 Ford Focus. He had gotten back up on the stand to say, I looked it up, and basically the only 2016 Ford Focus of this exact model, everything else, was Richard Allen's in the whole county. So the question was, well, really, when you did your look and you went to the neighboring 5 counties, I think it was, then you actually looked up 2011 to 2017 because they had a similar body and they were similar models. So you probably couldn't tell that from the Hoosier Harvest Store video. You can't really tell if it's Richard Allen's or somebody else's. And in this particular case, he named all of these different versions of the Ford Focus that would have looked just like this. And he said that's because, and you eliminated all those for no good reason because they looked the same, because you didn't want the car shown on the Hoosier Harvest Store video. You wanted it to be Richard Allen's. You didn't want it to be somebody else's. So you eliminated everybody and said Richard Allen's the only one. He said, why did you not want the jury to see all these other cars? Do you think it's important for the jury to see? And he said, it would be, I suppose. So that was pretty big hit. And the prosecution then objected because it didn't have the certification letter. And the judge said, well, without the certification, it doesn't come in, which I found really amazing because the prosecution produced it to the defense. So they produced it without the certification letter, apparently. And then that prevented them from using the prosecution document that had been talked about by the prosecution when they put him on the stand. I am just amazed at that. But anyway, they didn't get it in evidence. The evidence is still there in terms of the testimony. They just didn't get that document in evidence. So that's not actually physically going to be something the jury will take out with it, a list of however many cars it was that were not, that looked just like his and that could have been what's shown on the Hoosier Harvest Store video. I have always wondered why they are objecting so hard on this, because it seems like there are 2 possibilities for that Hoosier Harvest Store video, which shows Richard Allen's car zipping by at 1:27 p.m. possibility number one, that what Richard Allen said about being there between 1:30 and 3:30 is true, and he was driving by, about to park, about to go in. So if that's true, then it's true. And he already told the police that, and they're entitled to believe it, and the video really doesn't change that. Option two is that he was right. He was there from 12 to 1:30, and he was parked at Mears. He actually made a statement, something about that, in his interview before he was arrested. He parked at Mears, and he was shown in the video afterwards at the exact time he said he was between 12 and 1:30. So I'm not really clear on why they haven't argued that's Richard Allen leaving, not Richard Allen coming, and that he parked at the Mears entrance. Where he parked is just a huge sticky mess, because he talked about it being the old Farm Bureau building, and then there were other buildings, and nobody knew what the old Farm Bureau building was, so they thought maybe it was the old Child Protective Services building. And then there's a car that was off to the side at the old, near the Child Protective Services building. And then there's some Mears entrance that he mentioned. So none of that is super clear, but it just seemed to me they possibly could have worked with it, but they have gone all in on disproving that it's his car. I think that's going to be a hard sell, just because, there probably aren't that many. It did look like his. It did fit one time frame he suggested. So if he's there at the time, that's the way it is. All right. So one of the questions I asked him was about missing evidence. He said he created a log of missing videos of people who were interviewed. And the defense says, well, wait a minute. That's not what you told the court back on March 18th. You told the court there's no log. We lost all of these videos of interviews of people right after the murders, and we don't know where they are, and we don't have any list of the people who were interviewed. So there was no log. And he says, well, it was very strange. And I don't think the jury would have liked the way this came out. But so there was no log, asked the defense. He says, was there a question? Yes, we all heard it. Was there no log? And so he says, so there was no log. He says, was there a question? He asks again. Then he says, so the question is, there wasn't a log. And he says, are you asking a question? And then he says, there is a log of interviews. He said, I may have said that there wasn't one, but later I found a log in the filing cabinets. At this point, I was surprised they didn't demand a sidebar and say, wait a minute, what list did you find in the filing cabinets? Because that was never produced to us. I assume it wasn't produced, else they would have known, they would have been expecting this. They also asked, did you ever learn Libby's phone was no longer in the area or no longer in working condition? There were objections, and all of that got sustained. So we didn't get any more information about Libby's phone. I'm assuming that the defense may offer an expert on the issue of the phone tracking. Some of their evidence was excluded around geofencing. So I don't know what they'll get in and what they won't get in, but some of that could be super important for the defense. So State Trooper Harshman talked about, and the van. He was asked about that issue. The van, of course, being the van supposedly driven by Brad Weber on his way to his house down his driveway. Richard Allen said in one of his confessions, one of the most important facts in the entire case, he said he was going to SV the girls, and just as he was going to do that, a van came by and startled him. And so he forced them he then decided to murder them instead. And so that's what he did as a result. So was there a possibility of a van going by? Because this is in the middle of the woods. But in fact, there is a road that goes underneath the Monon High Bridge right there. And that road is just a driveway to Brad Weber's home and a couple of other homes back in that area. And Brad Weber said, well, he got off work at 2:02 and would have hit there. The defense concluded 2:27 to 2:30. So could he be the one who startled Richard Allen and then caused Richard Allen to go through, get the girls across the creek and get them up the hill, murder them? Could all of that have been a result of the van? So did the van go by? Huge issue in the case. And so then the issue was, how did this white van come out? Like this van, and it is frequently called a white van, but in his confession, I didn't hear that with Richard Allen. It was just van. It wasn't oral. I think they described it. But at that point, they argued through questions of the witness that there was social media talking about a van, and Dr. Walla was a big fan of true crime, and maybe she sort of planted this idea, intentionally or not, in Richard Allen. So maybe that's where he came up with this van idea. And they asked, did you see anything, Mr. Detective Mullen, Lieutenant, about a van on social media? And he said, well, he didn't look, and he didn't know if Harshman had looked. So they said, would it surprise you that there were dozens of references? I had assumed it was dozens of references in the discovery they had produced from the defense that they had provided to Richard Allen, but apparently they just meant on social media. Then a juror question came in. Well, why would anyone discuss the van prior to Richard Allen's confession that a van scared him? Which is a really good question, right? Like, why is this even something we're talking about? So there were two things that then were mentioned by Baldwin in his questions. He's one of the defense attorneys. What about a Ford cargo van that was suspicious and had no windows, and a man maybe in his late 40s or 50s the very next day was asking kids at a bus stop if they wanted candy, and it was just, I think he said, a half mile away. So then he threw out, and also, what about a white van driven by a man named Aaron? And there were objections that were sustained right at that point that this was outside the scope. All right, let's take a brief break before we head into, we're cruising through our final witnesses. So, and don't miss, Brad Weber is coming up again. Yes, that's right. Brad Weber is back. It went much better this time than last. Thank you, Lucy. I appreciate that. And Spunky coming in again with another 5 lawyerly memberships. Thank you. I appreciate it. And Merbella, I appreciate that. Thank you, Mandy. I appreciate it. I'm enjoying doing this. I appreciate y'all watching. So let's see. Lindsay is a new member. Hey, Lindsay. Chaos MXR. Thank you. I appreciate it. Dodd's discussions. Love all my outfits. Oh, thank you. A fashionista channel. Well, we were having a get ready with me on the members when I showed the gigantic coat I bought at Walmart for Indiana weather, which to me is like really, really cold, but I'm sure around here they don't think it's even that big a deal. But I did buy an enormous coat. So maybe that'll be my next channel, the Get Ready With Me channel. Thank you, Rosie. Well, I'll stop right there for a minute, and let's head into Brad Weber. It was really well done. Baldwin just started with where we left off because the final words, Brad Weber was really angry. He yells, no, and everything came to a stop. Well, this time Baldwin says, when you left the stand, you were upset with me. He says, yes. Why? Well, I was upset because you were trying to tell me what I did when I left work. He said, you said you went straight home, right? And he said, yeah. He said, but that's not what you told the FBI agent Pohl, and there was another Indiana State Police officer assigned to that. I think he was Indiana State Police, Goatee. And in fact, you told them that what you did before you went home was you went to various ATM machines and performed service on them. He said, I don't recall that. Why does this matter? Because this van is driving, for the van to be there to startle Richard Allen between 2:27 and 2:30, for that to even be happening, he has to be going straight home from work. If he stops to service these ATM machines he owns first, he's not going to be home in that time frame. And so that reference by Richard Allen is just invented. He said, the week before, where were you? And he said he'd been out of town on a trip, meaning, I think by the defense, he would have needed to service these ATM machines. He ran the ATMs. He had 35 of them back in 2017. And he actually put the money in to the machine so that it would be available for people to take out. He got paid a service charge every time. So if it's out of money, he's not making money. So he made sure they were stocked and supplied with this money for people to pull out. And, he said, so he did have to regularly service them. That was for real. But what he says happened is he got home right at 2:30-ish, and he woke up around 5 o'clock. And the reason he woke up, at one point he said 5:30, but it's because a police officer arrived and told him they were looking for two missing girls. And so he told him, look around. He didn't give him permission to go in the buildings. They didn't even ask, but he told him, look around, and he went back to sleep. So they went through this long exchange on whether he'd given permission or not. And basically he said, on the 13th, I didn't give permission. Later, when they said, can we search your home? He said, yes, leading to this really interesting exchange. And I double checked this with other people because did I hear that wrong? Including with Lindsay, I think. So the photo of February 19th, 2017, this is just 5 days after the girls' bodies had been discovered, 6 days after they disappeared. And remember, the bodies had sticks on them. So the question was, are these sticks on the ground in your garage? I was like, did I hear that right? And he said, yes. It was the photograph was admitted of his garage was admitted over the state's objection. The state, at least at one time, explored the idea that maybe he could be a suspect. They certainly searched around. They took his gun, concluded that firing it was an inconclusive match with that cartridge they found at the scene. They say that cartridge matched to Richard Allen's gun, unlike Brad Weber's Sig Sauer, which it didn't quite match. But the answer was yes on the stick. So, and I asked around, I got two media people who were sitting up front. They also heard the word sticks. I'm like, wow, does he have a pile of these sticks like ready to go in his garage? But when I talked to one of the media allowed to go up and view the pictures, they said it just looked like, sticks that might blow into your garage over the fall, that it didn't seem, or the winter, it didn't seem like there was a pile of sticks ready to go, the next time two girls were found on the trail. It didn't seem to be something that was a significant piece of evidence to her. So anyway, I pass it on for whatever it's worth. The cross-examination by the prosecution, by the state, said, well, if you talked about when was the time he would best remember, closest to the time, he agreed, yep, it would be closest to the time. And apparently on the 17th, so again, just 4 days after the girls disappeared, 3 after their bodies are found, the police stopped his car and asked him, what were you doing? He said, well, I got off work at 2:02 and I came straight home. So he said that. And then he said he went to collect or service the ATM machines. And then he says that he went straight home. So he's had that entire array of stories. So it's back to the story he initially told, but in the middle, he said something different to the FBI agent. That FBI agent is not going to testify. The defense wanted to bring that FBI agent. They wanted to bring, it would have suited them if the other detective who was doing the interviews would have told them that underlying fact, but he wouldn't. So at that point, then they had to go to the FBI agent. The problem is that FBI agent not only has some kind of medical issue that prevents flying, but also is in charge of election security in Texas tomorrow. So he obviously can't be traveling to another state. I had initially thought, well, maybe they'll try to stretch out the defense case to reach maybe Thursday. Maybe that's when that witness could come. But I think they've got this in. I mean, I feel like it's clear to everybody that he told two police officers who came and asked him questions that he went to service the ATM machines first. And jurors had great questions around this that absolutely should have been answered. Do you know if the ATMs would have photo or video of when you were servicing them? Right? Right? What he said was not the ATMs themselves, but some of the locations around them might. Now, by now, of course, I'm sure that's all overwritten. I don't think any of that would still be available. How far in advance did you have to order cash for the ATMs? And it was a week out. So if he wanted it, he'd have to order it. So that might be some evidence that if the week before he ordered the cash, so it would be ready to put in the machines, then that might be evidence. Yeah, he was going to service them on Monday, although Monday, Tuesday might not show that. And somebody asked about what's the process to clock out at work. They are really focused on the timeline. Is it possible? Could this crime have been committed that quickly? And he said, it's a turnstile. You use your badge and you exit. So it's pretty quick. Another juror asked, do you drive under the Monon High Bridge? And he said, yes. And in fact, that's how I get home. That is the route I take. I drive under the Monon High Bridge. Another juror said, do you typically go home first before you service the ATM? Still thinking, well, maybe that time frame. And his answer was typically not. So we have completed. Oh, no. Darn it. I thought we had completed the day. But we have a little bit more, and then I'm going to get into our timeline because I don't want to miss that. One of the things I want to do, you saw that the prosecution accused the defense of selecting the days to correlate to confessions. So I'm going to show you that on the timeline. You'll know all of that after you look at the timeline. You'll see when the confessions occurred. I think what I'm going to have to do is do like a whole night we'll do on the confessions. We have so many fun things that are going to happen this week. We're going to have Jumpsuit Pablo on tomorrow night. I'm working on a joint video that I'm going to do. I'm going to hold back on who it is with whom I will be doing it. But what we're going to be doing is I am looking for and want you to write me or send me theories about the case. What do you think? What's a way that in your mind you've been trying to puzzle this out and you're like, okay, what if this and this and this, and send those to me. And what I want to do is the two of us are going to sit down. We both watch the trial, and I'm going to say, okay, here's what it looks like. Let's talk it out. And we're going to try to figure out, okay, no, that wouldn't work and this wouldn't work. And we learned this fact, and we're going to try to poke holes in it to see which theories might actually work, which ones won't. So what I need from you is your theories. So you can email me or put it in the chat. Any of that would be great. All right. So at this point, they did their offer of proof. I was really expecting way more than what we got. I thought the proffer would include actual testimony. Instead, they did a very cursory summary of what they would be doing. It was so much less than I thought. I, in fact, am concerned that they may not have the issue preserved as well as they need it to be preserved for purposes of appeal. They have already presented some evidence back this summer. All of that got incorporated. And here's what they have for this, that they would have put Kevin Murphy on the stand. And he would say the whole group said 2 to 3 people were involved, and 5, and probably even, or maybe 5 or 6 people were involved. This was not a one-person crime, and that no one thought up until then that it was a one-person crime. We know that already. And the prosecution said, well, that's really pretty much cumulative because they've already put 3 witnesses or cross-examined 3 witnesses who said, okay, yeah, we at one point thought it was more than one. Now that Richard Allen has confessed and said he did it all by himself, we think it's only one. They said they would like to do a little bit more with Weber, whose gun was evaluated, who lived right there, who owned the property where the girls were abducted. And they said it would be about 10 minutes more. And he wanted to ask a series of questions of Lieutenant Holmes about that related to Elvis Fields. Elvis Fields had, according to his sisters, confessed to them, told them, yes, I actually did this. And then when the police talked to him, he didn't confess in the true sense of the term. But what he did say is, what if my spit were found on one of the girls? Would that evidence, I forget the exact language, but would that evidence be used against me? If you found my spit on one of the girls? And the questions that Baldwin wanted to ask were, if Richard Allen told the police, if my spit is found on a girl, would that evidence be used against me at trial? Then that would definitely be used against him at trial. So why can't we present that evidence about what Elvis Fields said? Also, if Richard Allen had done social media posts like Elvis Fields did that suggest of girls and murders, would that be used in a trial against Richard Allen? And I haven't actually seen, I don't know exactly what the Elvis Fields Facebook posts are. So I'm just sort of extrapolating from things that people have said, but I don't know. I know he was copying some posts by Brad Holder, and those, the defense thinks, relate back to Odinism. All of that's out. Judges ruled all the third-party culprit, ruled the Odinism out, all out. So if there were a big crime scene photo on Richard Allen's computer with human girls with sticks on them, would it be used against Richard Allen? And the answer to all these is very, very much yes. I mean, the evidence is very limited against Richard Allen. And the confessions, frankly, are the biggest evidence against him. That is the number one thing right now. No, which is why we're going to look at that timeline in just a second. No evidence matching any of these people to the crime, the judge said. Ironically, then saying there's no evidence matching any of these people to the crime. There's no nexus. Like, for example, there's no DNA. Ironic, because, of course, there's not any DNA of Richard Allen either. No fingerprints, no DNA of Richard Allen at the scene. So the fact that there isn't DNA or no fingerprints linking anyone else to the scene, if that's the rule, then you have to question whether Richard Allen has a significant nexus to be prosecuted. And I'm sure that that is exactly what they will argue on appeal if they lose, if the jury convicts Richard Allen. So let's pull up that timeline, because I definitely want to get to that. Rosie, let me see. There we go. What happened with the email that was going to show deviant behavior, says Lucy. I don't know what you mean, Lucy. Oh, I think I know what you're talking about. You're talking about those searches, that the Google searches under a particular email login. And they were really sort of underwhelming. They were not, I didn't get to see them because only the media got to see them. They were handed out to the jury, and the jurors read through them, right? Just in front of us. So we watched them read them. The media was then allowed to go up and look at it. And some of the media have reported fairly extensively on what they were about. They weren't a nothing, but they were not particularly strong either. They weren't ones that I think of compared to Rex Yearman. Those are just terrifying, just horrible. And these weren't anything like that. One was like, what's the most deviant thing on Netflix or something, but just more, and I may not have the right word, but it wasn't something that really, really carried the ball. There was nothing about young girls or anything along those lines. Is the white van confirmed in discovery? Not in discovery. There has been, as of now, nothing to describe what he received on that day from his attorneys. They may be afraid to bring that up because it could open the door to all kinds of questions. And maybe that's the concern, is if they open that door, it may not be able to be shut. Thank you, Janudi 18. I appreciate that. ST Winner, thank you. And Deb is a new member. Glad to have you. Starting the dollar train. Thank you. I appreciate that, Lauren. And Luxury Lash Lady, that's really nice. I'm going to stop there. Carrie's and Lute's channel. Thank you. I appreciate it. They've been watching the whole time. I really appreciate that. All right. So let me stop that screen, and I'm going to add my other screen. And I've really debated on how best to do this, because this is something I think is so unbelievably important. I mean, I really think this is critical. That's why, I mean, you can see I spent a lot of time on this. Obviously, I think it's a big deal. So what I wanted to do was, if I pull that down, can we see a little bit more? I can probably, okay, we'll leave it at that. So it needs to be bigger. I wonder if I can make it bigger. I bet I can. Can you see the whole thing? Yeah, pretty much. That's much bigger. All right. So here's what I'm going to do. I honestly think this deserves like its own night. I mean, this is so important because this is the most important evidence in the entire case. I think going through every single entry one by one, critically important, because this is where the jury's going to make its decision. Every other thing fits into this. They aren't, and granted, it's not ballistics time, so they aren't focused on that though. What they're asking is, were those confessions real? Does the van indicate as a new fact that only Richard Allen would know? Does that indicate that the confessions are real? It's all so important. So since I covered this to some degree on Saturday, I've added in there the confessions to his wife and to his mother. And I've also, you'll see as I go through here, that I've added in when there were videos of what was happening to him in prison. That's the orange right there. So it was on April 6th, the camcorder walk around video. There were 4 I didn't have dates for. So I did the best I could. So I've got 11 of the 15 in here, and I've got the dates for the 2 of the overhead camera in his room. So that is what I am doing. So trying to decide, it's 8:40. So, well, let me know. Do y'all want to keep going? Do you want to cover this in detail, or do you want to break it off into another video? Are people exhausted? Let's see what people say. Let me head down here. If I could do a poll on this, I would do it. So let me know what you think. Go ahead and put that in there. And it'll take us a bit to go through it all. Like I say, the most important evidence that there is nothing that matters more than this. It's either he is acknowledging it and he confessed, or he didn't. Either it's a fake confession. The defense has gone to a tremendous amount of trouble to prove that what they believe, which is that it's a fake confession. Keep going. I'm getting some keep going, some wait. It's like, I don't know. I've never done an over 2-hour video before. That'd be really, really, really a lot for me. So, and for y'all, I don't think any of us are used to that. And poor Marlon, who is already at like 4 a.m. or something on Netherlands time, will be like falling over. Denise is like, what did I sign up for? My very first time. What on earth? All right. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do just some highlights for you of stuff that's new, but I'm not going to do the whole thing. I do think it's worth a whole video. I think it's worth a true deep dive into this, but I don't think that I'll be able to do all that justice tonight. So what I want to do, I'm just going to skip to some of the key points, and I want to talk about some of the confessions to his mom and to his wife, Kathy, because we haven't talked about those before. So red is a confession. You see that sort of burgundy part right there, Richard Allen to his wife, Kathy. That's a confession. Blue is things related to the circumstances around him, like what's happening, how he's acting, anything like that. And then that orange is whenever the defense played a video, so that we have some data about, we don't, but the jury has some data about what it looked like, because I wanted to see how this all plays together. One of the things to notice is that the first confession, they think that the prosecution argues that November 22nd is the first confession. I don't agree with that. But the March 21st is a confession, because he does talk about he hoped he could convince the families of Libby and Abby, although it's not totally sure what he would convince them of. And so she said the portion about committing the murders was concise and in order. So there was a confession of some sort there. But let's look right here. April 3rd, he said to his wife, Kathy, I did it. And she said, what? He said, I killed Abby and Libby. And she seemed stunning. I meant stunned, and says, no, you didn't. And she tells him, you're not well. He changes it to, well, maybe I did. And I think I did, which is really different and definitely plays into the defense theory that this is all some kind of psychotic break, not a real confession. She tells him they're messing with his mind. She asks, why did you say that? And he said, because I think I did. I wish I knew. I don't know. She says, exactly. There's something wrong. They're trying to get you to say things. So notice that part of the accusation by the prosecution was they showed things right around the confessions, which frankly makes sense. That's what the jury is focused on. Are there reasons in the environment to make them believe that he is in such a psychotic break that he would falsely confess? So that's very real. All right, let's move to the next confession to one of the family members. Oh, look at the wrong color. Darn it. I'm looking at blue. I should be looking at red. All this is very confusing. In fact, I may go back and change the way that this is done. Okay, so that is still to someone else. The guard, Dr. Walla, the guard, the officer. And here you can see, for example, on April 12th, an incel video was shown to the jury. What do we know about him? At that time, he's banging on, kicking the door, self-pleasuring, even when she was at the door, rolling around naked, looking at the camera in his cell, refused to wear the kimono, so he couldn't go to rec. And Walla thinks he's trying to get something, making it up. So that is probably the incel video that they shot. No wonder they were so... no wonder the guy wasn't looking. It probably was pretty hard to watch. And there were camcorder videos right there on the 13th, the very next day. Looking for the next confession. We may have passed the one to his wife with Dr. Walla present. And here you see, this is the period when he's drinking toilet water on April 2nd. And anyway... All right, here's more from Dr. Walla. I'm trying to find the part where he confesses to his wife. Here it is. On the 10th of May, he called his wife in front of Dr. Walla and told his wife he did it. And Dr. Walla told us about this. And now we hear the recording, for example. Richard Allen to his wife in 2 calls. He's mumbling. He's like barely talking. He says, I think maybe I lost my mind. He asked, can he trust his attorneys? I need you to know I did this. She said, no, you didn't. There's no way. Do you still love me? I don't know what's going on. I'm definitely going to lose my mind now, though. It's true. No, it's not. It's true, honey. No, it's not. And he persists. I killed Abby and Libby. I need to know someone's going to love me no matter what. And she says, I do. And you can hear in that all of the things that we heard both from Dr. Walla and from Dr. Westcott today about his real need for that approval, for his family to be committed to him, that is a constant theme, that he depends on them, dependent personality disorder. Here's the next day to his mother on the 17th. Did Kathy tell you that I did it? The mom says, we're not going to discuss that. You're not in a good place right now. Just saying it doesn't mean you did it. And Richard Allen says it does if you did it. The mom says, don't talk like this. I think they're just messing with you. Richard Allen said, no, Mom, they're not. I did it. And the mom says, I just don't know, you don't have it in you to do something like that. And Richard Allen says, I wouldn't tell you I did it if I didn't. That was, to me, the most important confession, the one that was most difficult to move around, because you could see on the others, you could understand their argument, but this one, just the way he phrased it and the way he talked to his mother seemed different. Now, on the 20th, they showed another camcorder walk. The one other day they picked out for incel video was the 27th of May. And I didn't really have any notes on what was happening around that. So I was like, I wonder what exactly was so significant that that was what they chose to do. And I don't know why they picked that day in particular. There must have been something really significant going on in that time frame, but not being able to see it, I can't be any more specific than that. The next one was the 5th of June, where Richard Allen is moaning, talking to his wife, saying, I feel like I've lost my mind. I just want you to know that I done it right. And there's not as much around this video, this confession, as for some of the others. Now, at the 11th of June, this is right after the psychologist has noted he's trembling, his knees are buckling, his depression is at its peak. And 3 days later, he tells his wife, I did it. I don't know what I'm doing. I feel like I've lost my mind. I can't tell you what's been going through my mind. So when you see it in context, you know he is in very significant depression right there. He is in a psychotic state, is diagnosed, and he's having physical effects, maybe from the Haldol they're giving him, or maybe just natural ones. Let's see if there's anything else that applies to the family, or if that was the last one to the family. They probably had to stop talking to him because clearly, it was not working. And if he was going to confess, they couldn't keep going. So let's go back to this one. So the first time he confessed, I thought it'd be interesting to look at what happens right around this. And the first time he confessed to his wife, where he said, I didn't. And she said, what? She didn't even know what he was talking about. I killed Abby and Libby. So what was happening around that? That was the same day that he got his legal mail. The phone call was not played to the jury, but where Richard Allen told his mother and stepfather that he doesn't know how long he'll remain lucid. But I think they did ultimately. There were 3 phone calls that day, and they didn't play all of them. There was one they didn't play in which I think it was it was Rosie, got all this out. He goes, well, isn't it true there's one where he said he wouldn't remain lucid? They were going to, thought that he was losing his mind. He professed his innocence, and he said his prison conditions are like Guantanamo Bay, and he's being mentally tortured. Didn't that happen? And it got all that out before the objections stopped him. But the judge had ruled that out. She had allowed them, not ruled it out. There were 3, and the defense said, if you're going to present 2, you need to produce the 3rd one and show the jury all 3 that happened that day because they're related. And the judge said, no, they can show 2. They don't have to show the 3rd. And you can show the 3rd if you want. Trouble being, in order to do that, Richard Allen has to actually come testify. So obviously questionable. All right. Yep, that was the first one. So anyway, I just wanted you to kind of see what was happening in context, because I think it's so, so, so important. But I do think that it deserves its whole night, and it'll take a good probably 2 hours to go through that and really delve into what exactly the interplay between when he confessed and what was happening physically to him and what was played to the jury. What have they seen? So I think it's worth it. I don't know exactly how we're going to fit it in, because we are still busy on all every time talking about the trial, but it's so important. I'm just gonna have to find a way to do that. And that's why I did that whole chart, is because I think it gives you the information and puts it in a form where you can watch how they interact with one another. To me, that's how you figure things out. That's how my mind works anyway. Okay, so I'll take a very few questions, but before that, let me go ahead and thank everybody over here. I've lost where were Carrie and the Fashionista channel. I'm still laughing at all that. All right, so I don't know exactly where I was. There we go. Kelly, thank you. I appreciate it. And flipping out, I appreciate that. And let me say too, and I'll go ahead and add Jennifer's to the list. Jennifer is organizing all of this line sitting for me. And if she were not doing that, and if you were not volunteering, I would not be able to cover this, because I was just losing it with my hour and a half of sleep a night before I had to be back over to wait. And there was a day I arrived at 3:45 a.m. and it was too late. That was too late. So we are having to expand the line sitting, and really do need your help. If you can help, please sign up. There's a link in the description. So if you live near here, if you have some time, there are now opportunities that are during the day, if you're not an all night kind of a person, and there are opportunities that are for the first part of the night instead of the second. So anything you can sign up for would be greatly appreciated. And that's what is enabling me to do this. So thank you, flipping out. I appreciate that. And a friend of St. Frank, it is in his bailiwick. Very good. Very good. Oh, note pages for today. Bets are in. All right. Let's see where we are. All right. Went to 40 pages. All right. Closest without going over, I guess. Is that it? Is it a Price is Right kind of thing? Snap Pack, thank you for that very generous super sticker. I appreciate that very much. And Simcha, thank you as well. And thank you, Vesper. Yeah, Vesper is talking about the cloak of darkness and just the difficulty with getting information out. In order to cover this case, I couldn't just watch it on Court TV or Law and Crime and talk about it. I mean, you literally have to be here, and you have to have people help you. You honestly can't even cover it by yourself, because there have to be people who are standing in line for you. There has to be somebody like Truth Seeker who would give up her seat for me. And without that, this coverage can't happen. So I'm so, so grateful for all of that. Ash the Myth. Thank you. What a nice comment. Thank you. All right, Megan. This is for snacks for the line sitters. They certainly deserve that. We need to figure that out. I have to be here at some time when a store is open. That is a really good idea. Prayers for justice. I agree. I think this case desperately needs justice, and it's figuring out what that is that's so important. Dad in video games. I like that name, and thank you. Wendy, thank you so much. And Mr. Burt Wayne, I appreciate both of you. This is a pretty expensive case, even for Dr. Lee. All right. Hit the view button, left top corner next to Zoom. Oh, he was telling me how to Zoom. Thank you, Marlon. Okay. I should have gotten that a little bit earlier, but thank you. View button, left top corner, left. Okay. Other left. I'm a bad right left person. That was always a joke with my husband. It would be like, which way do I turn? I'd have to shake my hand. Okay, which is this? It's right. Okay, right. And he'd be like, is that the other right? Like, yeah, the other right. So that was always, I never had that. All right, M. Meyer, thank you. I appreciate that. And Claire Rose is a new member. Why do you think the defense didn't allow the public to view the video? Seems like it would have helped in the court of public opinion. So, all right. Megan, super interesting question. Why? And I agree that it would have helped with the public opinion about the way he was treated. But he is nude, apparently, in some of it. And may have been doing activities that one would not normally want shown. So I can understand that would have needed to be blocked out or something. I can certainly see that. And would be more difficult with a video than with a still photograph, such as we have from the scene with the girls. So I can get that it would be hard to do. Maybe they didn't have the capability of doing that. But to me, I agree with you. It would have helped with public opinion about the way he was treated. But that isn't really their goal here. Their goal here is not just to say he was treated badly, because ultimately, I think that the prosecution is right. He's not the victim of the crime. And so that's not going to get him out of being convicted if he committed the crime. So I think that their focus is more on getting him off. And I don't think they think it would help with that. That's just my theory. I think it would have been useful for the public to know what was happening, but I understand the need to cover up certain things. I certainly get that. Line sitters are getting hearts from Wendy and from me as well. Thank you. Do you believe when he said, I didn't do all I said I did, but I did kill Abby and Libby? Do you believe he meant he didn't touch his daughter or sister, but did kill the girls? Right? I don't know. I do not know, Mr. Burt Wayne. That is definitely a question. I don't know what he meant by that. What else did he say? He mentioned several different people that he had SA'd. So was there something more but as far as what we heard, maybe it wasn't even admitted because it was irrelevant. There were things, for example, where he talked about he fell asleep and then that started World War III and everyone blew up, something along those lines, and the world was destroyed. So did he just mean that he didn't destroy the world? That he didn't create World War III? Well, maybe. Hard to know. Enjoyed Lawyer, with you. He is so decent. Yeah, he's great. And I had a great time. I'd never met Peter before, so it was a real pleasure. I'd watched his videos many a time, so it was a real pleasure. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Really nice. Thank you. I love Godzilla. I fully understand. It has to be people nearby who can line sit. So greatly appreciated. Now, I do need to say thank you, especially to the people who've driven a long way. That is so unbelievably humbling. I mean, I don't even know what to say except thank you. It really means a great deal that you would do that. Let's pop over here and grab a few questions and we will see. Oh, forgot to say, put your question marks at the beginning so that I see them. Totally forgot to say that. But I see many of you already know that. All right. I'm going to back up a little bit and see where I get into some of the first question marks. Hopefully someone did them in red. Those are really easy to pop out. I'm not saying, oh, there we go. Candace. So how and where are you leaning after today? And what's the most powerful testimony that makes you feel that way? So I'm trying, Candace, to remain as impartial as possible, and I try to do that all the way through the end. That doesn't mean that I maybe internally don't begin to make some decisions on my own, of course, but I'm trying to hear all of the evidence. I thought that by far the most powerful evidence for the state is the confessions. I think the bullet evidence, to me, that's pretty weak. I just don't buy the whole concept that you can match this up. So I'm with the defense on that being a real questionable science. As far as the confessions, that's where the rubber meets the road. That's where ultimately the whole decision will be made. And some small issues fall out of that, like the van. Like, was the van there? Was the van not there? To me, the biggest issue for the defense, in favor of the defense, is the timeline. It seems so impossibly tight because the girls filmed their abduction at 2:13, and really it seemed to me very possible from that video that there might be more than one person. The whole reconstituted video, that isn't the word they use, but the redone video, all of that seemed odd. It just really, like, the guy's way back and suddenly the guy's up here, and it's really confusing. And when they stabilized it and redid it, it suddenly was way clearer. I don't know. I found the whole thing mystifying. But and they only we've seen it a total of, I think, 3 times. It's 43 seconds. So by the time you see it, it's over. And the only law enforcement officer to really talk about it said he'd watched it 100 times. I'm like, that's exactly what I would want to do, is watch it over and over and try to pick up, okay, where did he move? How did that just happen? What were the words that were said? But so that's at 2:13. And by 2:32, Abby is dead. Wow. I mean, that's really fast. So from at 2:13, they're at the top, and they're not in the same location, nowhere near the same location. They start at the top of the Monon High Bridge. They have to go down an extremely steep embankment, and you can tell he's ordering them to do that. They have to walk through the woods a ways. They have to cross a creek. They have to go up an embankment on the other side and into a clearing, and that's where Abby is found lying on top of Libby's phone, after which it never moves again. So 2:32, phone stops moving. Abby is on top of it. So she must be dead by then. And that's only 19 minutes. And all of that has to happen with the van going by and that fast. Now, we don't have as much data about Libby, but we know Abby was lying on the phone at 2:32. That is super tight. And a lot of people have testified that they initially thought it took more than one person to do that. You've got the strange direction of the blood flowing not from the neck down as if a person were to be standing, instead it flows upwards. So they had to have been tilted backwards. It just seems really difficult for one person to do. And so I think those facts are the really strong ones on the defense, and the really strong ones on the prosecution are the confessions. So Richard Allen, his own worst enemy in that regard. All right, we'll do a couple more. Jeannie Wells wanting to know, if he did this, wouldn't there be any DNA or blood evidence still in his car? They looked and they didn't find any, nor did they find any at the scene. Also truly astonishing. How did all that occur on the spur of the moment by someone who didn't even plan a murder or know that the 2 girls would be there, and still no DNA left, just no trace at all? Amazing. I mean, how is that even possible? So I remain amazed by that and confused. Oh, somebody nailed it on the number of pages. I bet that is. It's that number, huh? All right. All right, let's see. I'm looking for the question marks at the beginning. I already answered that one. Let's see what else we've got. I'm looking for question marks. I may have gone too far. Okay. Davey wanting to know what I was thinking prior to trial and whether my mind has changed. So I think... and after the jury goes to deliberation, I'm not gonna give my opinion, but as far as before trial, I was particularly interested in the third party culprit, third party guilt evidence, because I felt like it was such a bad idea for the judge to leave that out. Now, I have heard people up here talking about, everyone's talking about the cost of this case. And so far, it's something like $4 million. One of the newspapers did a story on that. Well, the county doesn't have the money to do that repeatedly. And so the last thing anybody wants is to try this case again. And I think leaving out all of the third party culprit evidence, like 100%, like no nexus at all on any of this, I just think that was a mistake and really likely to lead to the case being reversed. And that's unaffordable. And it's torture for the families of the victims. It's just a bad result. That's not what you want. So to me, that was most important. The confessions have become far more important now that I'm here, now that I've heard them, actually orally heard the audio from the confessions to his wife and his mother. Now those are much more important, and I understand better what the prosecution is saying. And now, of course, what the defense has responded. All right. Looking. Why no detail? Did no one ask him how he kept them quiet or who he unalived first? This is Krista Butcher asking me this. And I think the reason is because what he stated was in the context of either just a phone conversation with his mother or wife, and they were trying to keep him quiet, like, stop saying that, you're making it up, and certainly not wanting him to confess on a recorded line, or to say the psychologist or guards, and they weren't allowed to just interrogate him and try to push it further as they might have done in a police interview. So there was no one asking him. There are huge questions. At one point, one of his confessions is that they screamed. Well, we know they didn't scream, because if they did, there were all kinds of people there in the park who would have heard this, and nobody heard anything. So that's probably false. There are clearly false things spread in his confession, sprinkled in there. They're just things that are incorrect. Is that because he was dreaming this, because he had put himself in this situation out of guilt, as the defense says, or were they just extraneous facts he threw in that were just wrong? That is indeed the question. All right, let's see. What do we have? This is April. Isn't it state's decision to ask to limit Libby's pick? Probably. And the defendant, that is true. I mean, I think the state must not have asked to limit those photographs. The defense, on the other hand, did ask to limit Richard Allen's, and I assume the prosecution agreed to it. And I agree with you, April. It is really concerning. I do think, as a matter of public policy, that the pictures needed to be seen, not spread widely, but I think that the facts contained in the photograph are integral to both sides. And if that had been withheld entirely, I think there would have been nothing but more speculation about whether the things were being hidden, and whether the fact that they were being hidden was because they were trying to prevent people from knowing the truth, which was that Richard Allen wasn't guilty, other people were, and it was all part of a conspiracy. So to stop that, there really had to be facts that were presented at least semi-publicly. So I'm grateful for that reason that they did that. I do think that was important for ensuring public acceptance of a verdict. And if they hadn't done that, there would never have been any acceptance of this. I think people would have continued to argue that this was just a conspiracy. So that's one of the reasons that you do that, one of the reasons for rules like that. But they did limit it to the people in the courtroom, because there were no photographs, there was no distribution. It was limited in that sense. We do know there was a leak of the photograph to some YouTubers. That was beforehand, not related to the prosecution. So I'm not talking about any of that. And as far as I know, those didn't go out in the public. Those were contained at that point. All right. Amber asking, is either side or any evidence to suggest the girls were made to assist Bridge Guy in carrying out these crimes? I don't think they have any idea. It is not out there. There's not anything that would tell us that. Zoe is asking me, Pillowgate, where did the pillows on the bed disappear to? So I moved them over there on the theory that somebody made a comment about all the pillows. I'm like, okay, well, I'll move them and maybe it will look more it will be less clutter, less visual clutter behind me. So I don't know. Now Pillowgate has started. So maybe that didn't help things at all. Jan asks about coerced confessions, and the judge and the prosecutor need the result. And I think Jan is expressing an opinion about the judge and prosecutor trying to get a result, and that entire incarceration was designed to break him and to cause him to confess. That is one of the things the defense argues. And that's an important issue, even if Richard Allen's guilty, independently. If he's guilty or innocent, it's still important if he was treated in such a way in order to coerce a confession. That would still matter, which is why I think that at least some of what they played to the jury, that probably should have been shown, so that there was, just as with the other, a public witness, so that there aren't theories about it that make no sense because they're false. Okay, timeline date when the lawyers are fired. That was right after the Franks memo, pretty shortly after, but I don't know the exact date. I don't have that on my timeline. Thanks for the super chat, though, Jan. Mr. Bertwain, is she deceased at 2:32, or is the phone just tossed on the ground prior to they were killed? Well, I guess that's possible, but she's lying on top of the phone and on top of a shoe, and she has not bled downward. So she was actually upside down slightly at the time, and there's not a lot of blood. So all of that sort of leads to the suggestion that she was, and they said she was killed while lying down pretty much. So I think, and they don't think she was moved at all. So you put all those things together, and that kind of suggests she's dead right at 2:32. I mean, or at least she's been attacked by 2:32. Amanda is scared for a guilty verdict because the evidence is weak. It is weak. The confessions are the strongest evidence against him, and that didn't happen until after they had already arrested him. Barbara Bradley, super sticker. Thank you. I appreciate that. And Suzanne as well. Thank you very much. Scrivener's Error is a new member. They should have fingerprinted the phone, says Mr. Bertwain. And if you mean Libby's phone that was underneath her, they did. They tried that. They tried DNA testing it, and they got nothing. It's really utterly astonishing. I mean, I guess the person was wearing gloves, but still nothing. No mixture of blood, no anything like that. Angelique, thank you so much. And Jan Lundberg is a new member. Thank you so much to all of you. I will take one or two more questions, and then we will call it an evening. So, Pillowgate, I'm still laughing over that. Aaron, do you think that this doctor presented as more credible than the prosecution's doctor? Yes, for a couple of reasons. She's just a very polished sort of person. She testifies for 50%, or does expert consulting work for about 50% of her practice. So that's what you would expect. But more because there were actual cross-examination questions that the defense could ask of Dr. Monica Walla, because she was actually involved in true crime, enjoyed true crime. So do we, right? Can't really fault her for that, but she knew about the case at the time she treated Richard Allen, and continued, according to what the questioning was, to go on chat and so forth after she was treating him. It was a little vague about the timing, but she definitely was still interested, involved, following the case while she was treating Richard Allen. She ultimately was not allowed to come back and to work at the prison where he had been held. So she wasn't exactly fired, because she worked for an independent consulting company. So she still works for that company, but it was kind of like being fired. So I think that made her testimony a little more cluttered. So for that reason, yes, I do think the defense doctor was cleaner that way. There wasn't any sort of dramatic problem that the prosecution could point to. Oh, thank you for reminding me of that, Wendy. I, as always, forgot to say, please hit the like button and subscribe. We would love to have you back for more, so please do that. I have not seen that timeline, Bamboo Lulu. I have not. I'm sure it's a good one, but I haven't seen it. Veronica, will the jury go to the bridge? They will not. The judge was asked to let the jury go to the bridge and said no. The defense wanted it. The prosecution said no. And actually, ultimately, I've forgotten, the defense ended up withdrawing that. So in any event, they're not going. They will not be going. And I bet they're so curious. Here they are all the way down from Fort Wayne, and nothing to do much on the weekends. And they're probably thinking, sure would like to go see that bridge, but they can't. Was Richard Allen ever rude or aggressive to any of the doctors or guards who had interaction with him? Asked Isabella. Well, interesting that you ask. I guess you could count the 2 times that he got tased because he wouldn't pull his hands out of the door. That's how it's been described to us. But more importantly, would be an incident that happened apparently 2 to 3 weeks ago in the Cass County jail, where he is being held while he's here for trial. While he was in that jail, apparently there was a period when he had just a meltdown and was kicking and screaming and cussing and yelling and really just throwing a fit. And it had to do with his wife and his mother have been taken off the call list. So now they couldn't call him at all. And, he had just a meltdown, freak out. That was on video. The prosecution wanted to play that for the jury. The defense absolutely went livid, upset over that. And ultimately the judge ruled with them. Not very many rulings go the defense way, but that one did, and it was an important one. All right, well, let's see. So R.A. was scared of the van seeing him R the girls, but not of seeing him K them. So 9OB asked me, 9Abby asked me. I think the issue was that wherever they were, they could be seen. According to what the prosecution has had witnesses talk about, the place where the bodies were ultimately found could not be seen from the far side of the creek where the van was. So wherever they were at the time, they could be seen. Evidently, since he saw the van, I mean, I'm assuming here the confession is real, right? I'm assuming for the purposes of this that it's real. So according to the prosecution argument, then he moved them to a spot where they wouldn't be seen and decided, I'm not going to R them. I'm going to do something different. I'm just going to kill them because they might tell on me, which could hurt me, could hurt my family. That's what they're arguing. Jolene asking for help with the line sitting. Indeed. Please, please, please. That's a link in the description to the video. I will see you all tomorrow night as close to 7 p.m. as I can go. And don't forget, Jumpsuit Pablo will be on answering our questions about the whole prison thing. Is this really weird? Is this normal? Is 13 months too long? What does Jumpsuit Pablo think about this? Has he ever heard of somebody being in solitary for 13 months? And what does he think that would cause? So I am curious what he has to say, and I will see you tomorrow.